We have from Israel 365 News, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, and we have everyone knows Rabbi Pinchas Winston, and we're going to pass it on to you, and thank you for joining. I'm going to be here in the background if you need me, so just let me know if you need anything.
Great. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi Winston. I don't know if you've seen what's happening, but this election, anyone who predicted a runaway election, it was wrong. It's hugely close. And surprisingly, Donald Trump seems to have the popular vote a slight edge. Right now, Joe Biden is winning by approximately 88 electoral votes, but a lot of the votes are not counted yet. And there's predictions that President Trump will be winning a lot of the key states, the swing states. And the reason why I'm so happy to be speaking with you is I need to speak to a rabbi. I'm having a rough time this morning. So there's something I always want to explain to my readers. This polarization we're going through in the end of the days. I mean, it's to the point where there's threats of burning down cities if people don't get what they want. That's a level of polarization I don't remember. If you could give us a short description of how that fits into the end of days, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you that the truth is that it's not just a polarization. It's in some respects nothing's different. Nothing's different. You go back to the French Revolution, you find similar things all through history. It's been an ongoing battle in terms of I would say what I would call the maturity factor. People who are able to deal with reality as reality exists. You've got two types of people in the world. Those who are willing to change because the situation demands it, and those who are not, who will change everything else around them to suit their own liking. That's the difference between selfishness and selflessness. We're born selfish, can't help it. That's just the way we are, and we go through life, and the process of growing up is the process of maturation, going from a level of selfishness and becoming more selfless, as time goes on. And I think if anything, we've watched. I remember I think it was 1997. William Bennett, who was the Secretary of Education, I believe under George Bush Sr. at that time, if I recall correctly. But he wrote an article, a very important article that caught my attention. I think the attention of a lot of people. It was still early, and people didn't appreciate it for what it was. But he was basically talking about the dumbing up of society, specifically American society. He was very concerned about the future, because he saw where people were going with the technology and the educational system, and we're talking, the baby boom generation that was coming of age, and getting involved in politics and things like that, and people weren't thinking, to the extent that they should be, independently and intellectually, and we live with this illusion that just because people go to college and study medicine and law and things like that automatically people are going to be brilliant and smart and intellectual, intelligent, and make the proper decisions. But it's like just it's not even a deviation. It's actually quite important factor. Obviously, from a secular perspective, it means nothing. And I once had that perspective. I once came from that direction. I grew up that way. And if someone had told me back then about, let's say, 30, 40 years ago, and I'm about to say now, I say, what does it have to do with the price of tea in China? It doesn't, but now I know differently, and now I understand the importance of this, and that is that we every Shabbat we read from the Torah a certain section. It's called the Parsha Shvuah, the weekly Torah reading. You go to synagogues around the world, and that's what they're going to be reading. We read a little bit of it starting the Shabbos afternoon, and then we do Monday and Thursday, and then Shabbat we read the whole thing. And there's an obligation for males above the age of 13, basically to review that in advance of the weekly reading, because it is the Word of God, after all, and it's supposed to tell us how to live. So it's not the kind of thing you're just going to skim through like the newspaper. You're supposed to, pay attention to the words and take them to heart. They're supposed to have an impact on you. So therefore, we're told we should review it in advance and not wait until Shabbat to go through it. So I took that upon myself a long time ago. It's an important thing, and it's a very worthwhile thing, because I find that every week I glean insights about life by doing this, that I just really very exciting insights. And one of the ways to do it.
Rav, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just you said something that was really strong. You said there's a difference between selfish and selfless. And I'm so entrenched in what's happening right now. Yeah, it's like
I'm coming back to that. Give me 1 second. I'm coming back to
it. I mean, I just think. Okay, go for it.
Anyhow, so one of the ways to do it, because it's very long. Some people wait until Friday or until Shabbat, might do the whole thing, review it all at one time, which is great, and that's really a very good way of doing it. But I find, number one, I rush too much, I lose my attention span, and it's tiring. So I do what many people do. There are 7 different sections of that weekly reading, and there are 7 days of the week. So like many, I divide it up and do one aliyah a day, one section a day, based upon what's broken up in the Torah itself. And it's uncanny. I have found so many times, and I'm not the first one to say this, some great rabbis have said this in the past and pointed it out, there's no such thing as coincidence. From a Torah perspective, from a biblical perspective, everything is from God. Even the most meaningless thing to us and seeming the small, doesn't make a difference. A fly lands on your pencil at some point in time, that's divine providence. There's no such thing as coincidence, no such thing as happenstance. It's all basically based upon what God's doing at that time. So certainly when things coincide, they mean something. Sure. And when a major event is happening in the world, and even in my own personal life sometimes, I look at that week, that daily reading, the one that I'm reading that day, to see, if there's anything connecting what's going on to what's being read. And yesterday we read about the episode about the destruction of Sodom, Sodom and Gomorrah, like those bad boy cities, places where things were going on that God wasn't too pleased about.
Oh my!
and it was destroyed there, and we're told why and what happens in the whole episode. And God has a lot of patience. He puts up with a lot of things for a lot of times. In fact, there's a concept in Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, that even though people are doing bad stuff, God will wait until they fill their portion of bad. In other words, you can go on for many years. Rome lasted for 500 years and was doing all kinds of stuff that was against the Torah itself, but God put up with it, until eventually got to a point where they reached their limit. Reaching their limit, that's it. Once that happens and you don't turn around, you don't fix things up, right? The story of Jonah in the city of Nineveh, they turned it around. God threatened, they turned it around. So you can fix things, but if you go past that point, Rome fell. Historians will say, yeah, because it was 500 years old and the Mongolians came down from the north, it was corrupt. Yeah, we're not so concerned about the means that it takes place. The fact that it takes place, from our perspective, is a meaningful thing, and it's God talking to the world and telling us what he thinks, and he's responding to reality. See, we have a tremendous turning point in history, right? Yesterday. Now, today's reading, interesting enough, continues on. It's actually just after the destruction of Sodom, but an extremely important episode that takes place that the rabbis, stand on because they want us to understand. Now, after Abraham comes back from Egypt and the whole episode with Sodom, it's destroyed, and Lot runs away and gets involved with his daughters, and eventually produces 2 nations, Moab and Ammon. From Moab comes Ruth, and from Ruth comes the line of Mashiach from one side, and very important connections over there. But there's one particular episode after that. Abraham goes down to a place called Gerar, right, which is basically where the Gaza Strip is today, and became a Palestinian state, courtesy of one of our former prime ministers, and terror state, we might add to that. But he goes down there and he does this shtick he did once before in Egypt. He tells Sarah, "Look, I'm going to tell them that you're my sister, not my wife, because if I tell them you're my wife, they're going to kill me. They don't want to have me around when they take you. But if I tell them you're my brother, they'll still take you. But you'll be protected anyhow, because we saw that down in Egypt. But they won't do any harm to me." And of course, as the story unfolds, what happens is that they do exactly that. They give Abraham all kinds of gifts, and makes his life comfortable. They don't kill him. They take Sarah, his wife, and then of course that night God says to Avimelech, the king, and says to him, he says, you should know she's a married woman, right? To that guy who said that only the brother, and you can't touch her. And then he inflicts them with all kinds of an illness that blocks up all their openings in their body. And then the next morning, Avimelech, he says to God, how can you punish a righteous people? My hands are clean, etc., etc. And God says, I know you didn't mean to do this, but the clean hands part, forget about that part. That's not true. I mean, who just takes a woman against her will? And then he wakes up the next morning and he goes to Avraham and he says to him, tell me, what is it that you saw here in this place that compelled you to lie like that and put us all in mortal danger at the hand of God? He picks up on this. He says, why would you lie? Why not tell the truth? So Abraham comes back and he says, I saw that there was only not Yerushalayim. They uses the word rock, only not fear of God. That's what made me do it. So Rashi, the medieval commentator, says, what's the word rock? What's the word only doing here? Just say, there's no fear of God with me, only not fear of God. So he says, because everything else was there. It was a developed country, or city at least, okay? The population was successful. They had stores, and they had markets, and they had malls, so to speak, and they had every other aspect of life. The materialistic aspect of life was there. It was a very prosperous society, running smoothly. There's only one thing that was missing, he says, is fear of God. But that was everything. So when someone tells you something today,
that kind of describes America in a lot of places right now. They have everything.
Well, in general, even in Israel, we have that problem too. It's all over the place. Yeah. So nowadays, when someone comes up to me and they quote somebody about this or about that, whether it's financial, whether it's health, you just ask one question. Tell me, does this person believe in God? And does this person believe that if they lie, they're culpable? And like most of the time, no. So what's going to stop a person from lying? What's going to stop a person from cheating? Now,
that point is so strong. I remember in the last presidential debates, I remember thinking that Donald Trump, he talks like every successful, horrible boss I've ever worked for. He tells you the difficult truth straight to your face in a way that hurts deeply, but it's the truth, and he's successful.
I think it's one thing that he didn't catch on the entire 4 years, which is one of the reasons why he made a lot of enemies along the way. I mean, God runs the world. It's all from Shemaim, everything, all that also is part of the thing. But on a more superficial level, he came in to run the country like a businessman, and that's why
he did, and it worked.
And he turned it around. The only problem is that he ran his boardroom like a businessman too. And a businessman is somebody who knows he signs the checks. Because he signs the checks, everybody has to put up with everything he says and does, or you find another job. That's how it works in the business world. And
he says it because it's right and it's true and it'll make things work.
Yeah,
I mean, and then when I saw Biden talk, he's like, he'll say one thing one day and fracking. Oh, I'm against it. Oh, no, it's great. And he'll say whatever people want to hear, and that makes people feel good. They just, they go into this coma and they die very peacefully.
Because in the business world, time is money.
Yeah.
Right. Because time is money. You don't have to mince words. We're all here. You may not like what I say. You might think it's embarrassing. You may think I put you down. But if you believe that my doing this is going to somehow increase your paycheck one day, you'll put up with anything.
Right.
Behind my back, you'll talk about, boy, is he a nasty boss, right? And at lunch with your coworker, you say, boy, is he hard to work for, right? But you're going to go back to work together. You know why? because there's a paycheck at the end of the month, 2 weeks, whatever, which you like and you enjoy, and that's it. You'll work. You can stay there for 35 years, sometimes like that. But when it comes to politics, it's a different story. People clearly aren't interested in the truth.
Right.
It's not the issue.
I think it's the difference between Shaul and David. Shaul was the big, tall, guy who made a great impression, and he did what the people wanted, and the people loved him. And King David was like, I'm for Hashem. I'm working for Hashem. He's the boss. And so King,
not just that, but he understood we're building something here. See, we're building something here, and this is the difference. The difference is that nobody involved in this election is thinking about tomorrow, or the day after, or 10 years from now. Doesn't cross their mind. What do I care? What do I care? It's like we're living in, I hate to say it, extremely selfish society today, and I mean across the board. It's not just there; it's here too, and it's not just in the secular world; it's in the religious world too. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I watched people drive the wrong way down a one-way street because they didn't want to go all the way around. And these are the same people who might do this and do that and give check, tzedakah. But we think in terms of what works best for us today, because that's the way society has gone. And there's a rule in the Torah world, and that is, if we don't lead, we follow. We don't just not do what they're doing, but we actually become we absorb that way of life, and it spills over into our reality, and we start to apply it in our own life and the world as well. And this is what we're fighting against. We're fighting against this selfish drive. I mean, I've talked to people and been shocked, even though I know what to expect sometimes, by what people say and what people think, when they make the decision about, not just about who they're going to vote for, but how they're going to live their life, where they're going to go, what they think, how they're going to spend their money on. And ultimately, it's like, are you looking at the big picture? Because that's really the bottom line.
I hope I learned this from you, that there also seems to be a dispute, and I think you touched on this, between subjective and objective reality. For example, in the last couple of weeks, we've always known about Hunter Biden and all those not so pleasant things, and now it's become very clear, and it's really suppressed, and there's a huge amount of suppression of information. And it seems like the Democrats, I mean, you have this thing basically saying that the vice president of the United States took money from foreign governments and established policy according to it. It's almost like if it doesn't fit into my perception of reality, my subjective reality, my narrative, then it doesn't exist. And I've seen that in a lot of ways. I mean, if you walk up to me and tell me tomorrow, you bring me proof that Donald Trump, was really did something wrong, I'd be like, get rid of him. He's a crook. And when I've noticed that when I try to dialogue with people who don't like Trump, they'll say he's a racist, and I'm like, prove it. That's a serious accusation. Prove it. But they're so involved and invested in their subjective reality, in their narrative, in their perception, that they won't let reality get in the way. And I'm wondering if this has spiritual implications. If am I wrong? Am I totally off?
No, not at all. On the contrary, this it says blatantly right there in the Talmud. It gives a bunch of signs that we're at the end of days. A bunch of signs to know that Mashiach ben David. One of the most. I mean, when I read this the first 18 times, I only got this much of an appreciation. In the last 4 years, that appreciation went way up, and it's frightening how high it has gone. And that is, it says you will not be able to find a group of truthful people anywhere. The truth will be ne'edar, will be missing. Now, everybody lies at some point in time, right? Everybody changes the truth. There's been lying going on since, the first man in the Garden of Eden. Did you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Well, my wife, it's like, we've been playing with the truth the entire time. But I point out, there's a major difference, and this is really the point over here. And it's really a point, because if you look in this week's parsha, in the Eliyahu I was talking about, Avimelech says, I didn't know. I'm innocent. I'm righteous, he says. God says, yeah. Forget about a lot of this stuff. I know you didn't know. That much I'll test to. You really believe that you're righteous? You really believe you approach the situation with clean hands, like you're like on the same level as him? Come on, you're like, and there's a big difference between somebody who knows the truth but's telling a lie and somebody who's telling a lie and believes it's the truth. It's like night and day. Because somebody who knows the truth.
By the way, that Gemara was based on Isaiah chapter 59, where he mentions it in many places, that in the end of days, truth is going to be really gone, which is kind of counterintuitive, because you'd think that in the days of the internet, when information is so readily available, but that's precisely the problem. People, I've seen people prove the most crazy things. Right now, one of my major fears is that in a couple of hours, if it looks like Donald Trump will win, they're already boarding up stores in. Let's be straight. Let's be straight. I'm sorry, that it's Democrat cities. The Democratic cities, they're boarding up the windows. They're actually putting a fence up around the White House, and it's not against the Republicans. And I have friends who'll tell me, "Oh no, it's right-wing extremists, it's white supremacists," and I'm like, "No." But these people, and you'd think, oh, come on, they can't really they really believe it. So you're absolutely, yes, the end of days. You would think there's so much information readily available, but people they cannot see the truth, even when you put the video right in front of their faces.
Because you have to understand, the problem we're experiencing today is not new to this generation. It's didn't happen in the last 4 years. It didn't happen in the last 8 years. It didn't even happen in the last 10 years. It's been developing for over 30, 40, 50 years, probably since World War II. World War II, war has a tremendous capacity to shake the world up and bring people back down to earth and say, life and death, and you have to start facing the facts again. That's what happens. Whenever there's a major destruction, when Stone was destroyed and Gomorrah was destroyed, people have to wake up and say, could that happen to us too? We better start looking at what we're doing and maybe make amends.
I get the feeling people are making their own Sodom. They've
done that. It's like, what was going on over there? What was going on over there? If you read the Talmud, it's not like people think on the surface. You read the Talmud, basically what was going on with people were changing the truth. They were but they weren't just changing it. They weren't just lying. They were saying that this is the truth. That's the difference. See, God can't work with that. If someone's lying, we can work with that. We can say, come on, you know the truth. And if you don't, and inside he does, so that when you finally talk to him, it's the same thing. For example, you talk Jewish outreach. I used to be involved, in more directly in Jewish outreach. And I worked with a lot of people. And I found that working with Russians were the most difficult. Why? Because Americans, as secular as they became, they had God printed on their money. The concept of God was already inside their head and even in their hearts a little bit. So when you finally brought it up and you were able to show that God existed and all that, so then they snapped into it. But Russians were raised with the idea there is no such thing as God. It wasn't part of their intellectual and emotional vocabulary. So the age of 30, 40, you're like trying to put that in first and then talk about it is very hard. So
the operating system didn't have it in there.
Yeah. So if people are growing up with the wrong assumptions about life, which they have been for 30, 40 years, and it's been exacerbated by technology and the media, and you think that the truth would be more prominent because of all the information available, but information does not necessarily mean a person knows truth. It's been biased. It's been written by the same type of people who are reading it. So by definition, we're living in a society today where people actually believe. I talk to people who actually believe that what they think, even though it's inaccurate, that's not the fact, it's not reality, but they actually believe it's truth, and you can't talk to them. There's no starting.
Also, when you get to that point, and I think it's a form of mind control by the government to the masses, where if you get them where they can believe that a lie is the truth, then they can believe anything. I remember I was in New York when I was 20 years old when Donald Trump was, the young millionaire playboy, and now he's the billionaire president. And you could say a lot of bad things about him, but he was hanging out with Muhammad Ali. He got the Ellis Island Award. And he's definitely was always had a good connection with the Jews, even before Ivanka converted. And the one thing you couldn't say about him was he was racist. We always used to joke, the only thing he cares about is the color of your money. And now, you get people to believe anything. And if you just throw out a new lie, people will jump on it. And you're like, whoa, wait a second. If this is a new statement, let me check it out. But they don't even do that because they've been so trained to go for this lie. And I think, I take great faith in it because I speak to you and you've got me convinced, you bring one thing after the other. This is the end of days. Like you said, like Isaiah said, like we read in the Talmud, there's no truth. And that's the craziest thing. That's the craziest thing.
Let's not forget something very important. Okay. According to our tradition, according to what we believe, everything comes around again, right? There are 6 days of creation, 6,000 years of history. And each millennium corresponds to 1 day of creation. Now, it was the 6th day of creation that man made that fateful mistake of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is a byword now. It's like a household word. Everyone, a tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the truth is you have to take it, you have to sit down and say to yourself, okay, that it was a tree of good and evil that I can understand. We're being tested, our free will, and all that. Why knowledge of good and evil? Why is it a tree of knowledge of good and evil? And Adam is told, the first one, they're told, you're going to become smarter from this. You're going to become better than you ever were before. And you know why God said don't do it? Because he knows you'll challenge him in the end. So he's holding you back, not for your benefit, but for his benefit. So they all eat. And of course, once they eat, it's like, oh no. We've been duped, and now we're all confused and we're blinded by the whole thing, So it's like, oh no. So this 1990, that point on, when the internet becomes more popular, it is literally our version of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and everyone eats from it as if it's going to make them better, smarter, and it can. It's got the good element, 100%, but the evil element is also there too, a very prominent. So how do you know which is which? Is it so obvious? Well, apparently not, because there's times when good becomes evil, evil becomes good, and all these various different opinions. So that's why there are 2 trees there. There was a tree of life, right? That was the handbook. That was the one you're supposed to eat from first, or at least at the same time, because without that wisdom, to know, to recognize what you called before the objective truth, then your subjective truth is going to be biased, off the mark, and mislead you. And we have a whole world now, a whole society that has gone down that path. And if this is literally that period of time is corresponding, it's really the same thing all over again, then yeah, for sure, we're at the end, because the whole point of the end is fix up the beginning.
Oh man, Josh, I got to tell you, I was so tense this morning, and now that I see you wearing your tefillin, I'm okay. I can face anything. You look great.
Thank you. Two things. First of all, we have soon we're going to have some breaking news because the Vice President Joe Biden is supposed to make a public announcement. We don't know what that is, but as soon as that comes on, we're going to bring that to you live. Also, as soon as you're finished with Rabbi Winston, we have another guest in the studio, so just let me know when you're ready.
Great. I think actually, Rav Winston, to say we're on the edge of the end of days, and it's a good thing, and we're going to be fixing up the beginning. I would like to end on that, just because I'd like to. I mean, it's clearly true, and if I have your word on it, then I can certainly rely on it.
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, that's the point I'd also like to leave with. It's another part of the message in this week's Parsha, that some negative things have long-term positive results. The problem is what happens in between. What's the transition? That's the part where it gets rough sometimes. That's what we have to watch out for. We have to rise above, the media, and, people who are only focused on the events of the day will pull you down and drag you down into that reality. And from that perspective, it's like looking at a skyscraper from the top. When you look at the world from the top of the skyscraper, it's different. It's massive. You can see the larger picture. You see all the streets all interconnected. Even though it's the exact same place, but nonetheless, that perspective is completely different. And we cannot lose sight in all of this and all the frenzy, especially the media frenzy, and being fed by information from people who don't really care so much about the truth, but more what their mandate is and what they're being paid to do. We have to rise above that. We have to try to look at the situation from God's perspective. And when you do, it looks very different.
Rabbi, if I can, we have another guest. We didn't talk about this. If you'd like to join us, it's Tommy Waller, the head of Hayovel. If you'd like to stay on and talk about the elections with him, that would be great. If you're going to be running off and greeting the Messiah, then I don't want to stand in your way. But we're now going to bring Tommy Waller on. Would you care to stay with us, or would you care to?
I think I'm going to move on. I got some things to do today, but it's a busy day.
Okay. I really can't thank you enough. Speaking with you, really, has helped me cope with these very tense times. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to suggest to everyone, Rabbi Winston is a prolific author that writes about the end of days. You can find his books on Amazon. I highly recommend it.
Thank you.